Hello, I'm Carly McAvoy. Today I'm doing a review for Math 90, which is a basic math course. Review Part B. So it starts up halfway through that final exam material. The first thing we're going to talk about is changing from fractions into decimals into percents. I set it up in this particular chart in this order because it's the easiest if you have a fraction to change it into a decimal, and then from the decimal change it into a percent. When you change from a decimal to a percent, you move the decimal place 2 places to the right. That's why I put percent to the right of decimal, so it makes sense you're moving right to get there. And if you want to change this decimal to a percent, again, you just move the decimal point 2 places. We'll look at all three of these, starting with how do you change a fraction into a decimal. Please feel free to use a calculator, but what you're going to do is divide the numerator by the denominator, and then 5 goes into 10 twice, and so we have that as a decimal it's 0.2. And then if I want to change that into a percent, I move the decimal point 2 places. The first place goes after the 2, the next place after the 0, and so I'm going to get 20%. In the second one, if I wanted to change 26 into a percent, I just move the decimal point 2 places. I don't need to add a 0 here, so it would just be 26%. And as a fraction, I take the number of decimals I have, which in this case is 26, as 2, excuse me. I put the 26 over 2 zeros. And then like any other fraction, I always want to reduce to lowest terms. And once I reduce that, I divided both the top and the bottom by 2. Then I get 13/50ths. That would be the fractional equivalent of 26%, or 0.26 as a decimal. A little trickier type is when you have a third. You know, if you change it into a decimal, it repeats. 33, if you want to think of this in a percent form as a decimal, you can see what you get, 33 with 0.33333 repeating. So if I want to change a percent into a decimal, I move the decimal point 2 places, and that would give me 0.3333. Depends on how many places they ask you to go. If they said round to the hundreds, you just have 0.3, to the thousands, you'd have an additional third. Notice that the next number is always going to be 3, so wherever I round it, I'm going to keep it as a 3. If you had something that repeated that was 6666, when you end that, you'd have to end it in a 7, right? Because the next number is a 6, and that would make you round up. So that's something to remember. How do we change something like this into an exact fraction? How I'm going to do it is change this percent into a improper fraction, sorry. 33 times 3 is 99 plus 100, plus 1 is 100, excuse me, over 3. And then I'm dividing that by 100. That's the same as moving the decimal point 2 places to the left, but I'm keeping this in fractional form. That looks like 100 over 1. So what I have is 100 over 3 divided by 100 over 1. That's what this large fraction bar means. And if I take that and change it into a multiplication problem, you can see that the 100s are going to cancel, which means that it's exactly 1/3 as a fraction. Those are the most complicated ones when you have these repeating fractions. Change them into improper fractions and divide by 100, and you'll get your solution that way. It'll be exact. The next thing I want to talk about are 3 types of percent problems. When I talk about a percent problem, I'm talking about an amount over a base equals a percent, also called the rate, over 100. In a shortcut way to remember that when it's in this format is of equals percent over 100. So we can look for those words to help us figure that out. We want to set the percentage problem up that way. 5.25% of what number is 54? Well, I know that whenever I have a percent problem, I have 100 in the bottom right. My percent goes up here. And of what number is 54? The is should be your amount. That's what goes on top. And then we don't know in this case what the base is. We have to cross multiply to do that. 1/4 is exactly 0.25, so that would be easy just to make that 5.25. Might be easier to work with that. However, if you had something like 5 1/3 and it's not an exact, then you don't want to change that, right? So anyway, if I cross multiply, I get 5.25 times b, I'm using the decimal equivalent there, equals 5,400. And that's just cross multiplying both ways, the means and the extremes. And then I'm going to divide both sides with 5.25. And you have to look to see what the problem asks you, where they ask you to round it. A lot of these in the book come out to be exact, so you don't really have to worry about rounding. But let's see what happens for mine. I don't know if you can see my calculator. There you go. Yeah, 5,400 divided by 5.25 is not an exact number. I'm going to round that to the tenths place. This is 0.57 to the tenths would be 0.6 because that 7 went to the right. So 1,028.6, that's what B is. All right. Again, if they ask you to round to the hundreds, you'd go out 2 places, whatever they request for you on that. And the second one, 1550, is what percent of 2450? Again, I want to set up a proportion where I have a 100 in the bottom right corner. It's asking what percent, so that's what I don't know here. Is the amount of is the base, so the base goes down here. The amount goes on top, and then I'm going to cross multiply 2450p, 1550, and then multiplied times 100 adds 2 zeros to that. And then I'm going to divide both sides by the coefficient. The coefficient is the number multiplying the variable. Remember that term? And so when I divide by that, again, I'm going to use my calculator for this calculation and divide by 2450. And again, I do not get an exact number. I get I can round that. Let's round this one to the hundredths. That is 63.27 because that 5 after the 6 makes that round up to the next highest number. So I can state that as my answer. And that is actually a percent. I'm going to put the percent symbol on there, 63.27. And again, always look at the directions to see where they want you to round that. This one I was missing the base, this one I was missing the percent. So when we talk about 3 types, then the next thing we're going to be missing is the amount, the 20%, that goes there. Notice I'm not changing that into 0.20 because by dividing it by 100, I've already made that conversion of 176, and there's our amount. So that was a very almost a B and A. Okay, so then I'm going to multiply 176 times 20. That's 3520, 3,520. And I'm going to multiply in this direction and get 100A. I'm going to divide both sides by 100, and I get 35.2. Could be 0.20, but I don't need to add the 0 to the end of that if I don't want to. So there's the 3 types of percent problems. And finally, there's a percent word problem that we could do, and that is if 27% of the films at a festival are rated PG-13, how many of the 320 films were rated PG-13? So we know the percent in this problem. This is a percent problem. We're going to set it up using our percent proportion. I know the percent is 27, and that's what always goes above that 100. How many of the 320 films were rated PG-13? So we really can't use the is of thing when we have a word problem. We want to always talk about the base as the original total. Originally, there were a total of 320 films. So we're looking for the amount in this problem. What part of those were rated PG-13? And I could have added to the nearest whole number or something. So what I have to do is cross multiply. I know that 100 times A is easy, but I have to take 320 times 27, and that gives me 8,640. And dividing by 100, I get 86.4. And so I'm going to say it's approximately 86 of the films were rated PG-13 because we can't really have a fourth of a film. All right. One more thing about percent before I switch on to a new video is this: if you were asked to find like a discount amount or a sale price amount for an item, in this case, if I want to find the amount of the discount, what I'm looking for is, again, I'm talking about a percent problem. I have the discount, which is 35, the original cost I have, and so I'm looking again for the amount of the discount. So what I'm going to do is cross multiply 1255 times 35, and that's 43,925. And that equals 100A. That's cross multiplying in these two directions. And dividing by 100, we get A equals 439.25, $439.25. That's the amount of the discount. Now the sale price would be the original cost minus the discount, right? So I would subtract that to get the sale price, which is $815.75. All right, that takes you up a ways on your final, and I'll start the new video with conversions and talking about the conversions that you need to have for the final.